as if I'm talking to them, eh? All right. Hey friend, thank you so much for sharing these morning thoughts with me. I hear you in terms of, just questioning who we are when it comes to the way that most people think and move through the world and take in information and understand others, and how it feels like we've never quite really fit. And I'm smiling while I say this because I'm just so grateful to finally be talking to someone who I can actually talk about this with, and just feeling just like immense gratitude to not feel alone in wanting to share ourselves with others, wanting to serve others, wanting to help others, but wanting to do it our way, in a sense of, it's not that we don't want to support and help and serve with the problem that they have, but recognizing that the way that we approach problems is what makes us, is what makes us. I don't even want to sit here and say what makes us unique or what makes us special. Like, just recognizing everyone has their own unique mix as to what makes them them. But, wanting to just say like, hey, I want to help you with this problem, or I want to help you where you need support, but this is the way that I approach it. And the way I approach it, in the words of you, it might be a little, I don't even want to say these words, but you use the words like chaotic and stuff. And I'm like, can we go into the thesaurus? I know that the English language is already very limited, but can we go into the thesaurus and use a different word? Because, I feel like the word chaotic comes with a lot of meaning around that. I think we've put a lot of meaning around that, and I just, I would like to use a different word. So that's your action item, is to look for a different word than chaotic, because I don't think that we are, the way that we approach things, and I don't think the way that I approach things is chaotic. I think it's different. I think it's different compared to most people, but I think that actually that's my strength in that. And so anyways, I want to let you know, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you. So let's start with the beginning of the message. You were talking to me about your journal entry and wanting clarity at that time, in your early 20s. And given the fact that we're a little bit older and I've been actually thinking about clarity myself, I'll give you a couple examples as to why I think, for me, and maybe our brains, where clarity is important. And I say this because what I'm hearing in your voice is kind of this acceptance that you couldn't get the answers that you were looking for, or the clarity that you were looking for in our early 20s. Mind you, right? The development of a human being in their 20s, like, we are going through so many emotions already and trying to make sense of life, and like, we're out, in our first, chapter of adulthood. And so I first and foremost want to give us grace, and give you grace to be like, hey, you can still want clarity. You can still seek to understand what happened in this situation. You can still want those answers, but just also recognizing at the human developmental stages. I mean, and I don't know if it was from a male body person or a female body person, but let's be real. I think statistically they say that the male body brain doesn't even fully develop, the prefrontal cortex doesn't even fully develop until like late 20s. And for me that makes sense, because then I think for those who are born in female bodies with the brains that come with that, I think we're like at least a minimum 5 years, like the prefrontal cortex fully develops. And so you see it in straight situations, in relationships where like folks in female bodies are wanting to get married in their early 20s, and then those in male bodies like don't start wanting that until their late 20s. So that's why I see a lot of people, I can't say today is different, but I would say that there's a pattern in most recent society that it was in their late 20s that a lot of people were getting married. And then let's think about our grandparents. Anyways, that's a whole different conversation, but this is literally the point. This is a perfect example of how at least my brain works and how maybe your brain might work, right? Where it's like we're making these connections in real time. And it's funny, I've recently had the chance to connect with my academic advisor, my career advisor from university, and she even gave me feedback to be like, you speak so much slower now than when I knew you. I'm like, yeah. Couldn't keep up even if I wanted to. But thankfully for the practice of showing up on camera and all the other ways, it's like, yeah, that's the whole point, right? Growth is a big reason why we're here. And so I hear you in terms of what's the difference between growing and adapting, and how do we approach both of that. And so when I'm talking about clarity and clarity conversations, I'm saying clarity conversations because even for myself, the way that I used to say when I'm in conflict with somebody, that it's just a hard conversation. And even when I would say like in a hard conversation, I would say that typically a hard conversation can come in many different forms. I actually replaced coming out, aka coming out as queer, I replaced it with a hard conversation, and then it added another layer to say like, there's so many hard conversations to have. It's not just about coming out as queer. You can come out as being an alcoholic. You can come out as being, having certain experiences. You could come out as all of these things, right? And so for me, I remember changing that language for myself to say, I'm not coming out. And coming out is not just reserved for queer experiences. Coming out is a hard conversation. And people are having hard conversations all the time. And so now at this chapter in my life, I'm actually calling it clarity conversations, and just realizing how much I appreciate clarity and how it doesn't necessarily have to be positioned as a hard conversation because we already have meaning. We've already placed so much meaning as a culture and a society as to what hard means. And yeah, so that's why I'm just like, okay, what's another word we can use as opposed to chaos? It can be clarity, right? And yeah, so I think that that's something that's just worth chewing on as we share ourselves and process things and move through the world. It's just like English is already a limited language. So how can we expand our vocabulary a bit and really get as close to the word as possible to describe the feeling and the experience? And so you're talking about how you've been saying in a lot of your work around like the shades of gray, like playing in the shades of gray and the nuances and such, which I hear you, and I hear my partner too, who's often talking about the nuances. But for me, currently at this time in my life, I've realized how important clarity is so that I know how to move. For instance, I had a recent interaction with somebody where we were supposed to like connect and do something together, but then I hadn't heard from them for a while. I saw them in person and I felt like a little off. I was like, is there something there? Is there like a little remnants of something there? And I realized in that moment, I was like, I could make up all kinds of stories. Our brains are so good of making up all kinds of stories and making all kinds of connections. And so I had to like pause for a second and ask myself, like, is this true? Or am I just making this up? And so I reached out to them and I told them like, hey, this is the story that I'm telling myself. The story that I'm telling myself is that there's a little tiff, there's something under the rug, there's something under the carpet, and I'm just wanting to lift it so that I could get some clarity so I know how to move. Especially if we're gonna be in similar places and spaces. Like I wanna know how to move around you, and it's not about moving around them as a personality or like as a person. It's not a personal thing. It's just recognizing that if we're energy beings, like I want to know, as also an energetic being, to be like, is this a person or being where I feel repelled by them, or do I feel magnetized to them, or do I feel like I need to work around them, and also be very buoyant around them and realize like, whatever, I was looking for clarity. And so I reached out to them and be like, hey, this is the story that I'm telling myself. Is that the case? And of course, lo and behold, it's not the case. It was just a story I was telling myself. And so I just feel like right now there's a lot of language in society and in culture, in the West at least, and it's just talking about the shades of gray and the nuance, which I completely agree with, especially when it comes to conversations and cultural conversations and human beings and the way that the world is changing. Like right now more than ever, it's so important to not see things black and white. It's more important now than ever to not see things as binary. I completely that resonates with me on a macro level. But on a micro level, I know for myself that for me to keep the ball moving forward, the ball, or anything else that I'm working on or doing or progressing on and growing, and especially being in a relationship with others, clarity is so important to me. It's so important to me to the point that because of the way that my brain works, I have, a filing cabinet back here in the back of my mind where I've kept files of people I've been in relationships with, and there's some confusion there. And until I get to a point of growth where I'm willing to ask for clarity in those conversations, they just stay back there. Gratefully, I'm at a season, and I can say this because this happened 2 weeks ago. Gratefully, I'm at a season that filing cabinet, I'd say, is pretty close to empty. There's a couple folks in there where I can't get in touch with them because I don't know where they're at. I don't know if they're on the internet, whatever. And that's something that I just had to accept. Be like, oh, I'm not gonna get clarity from these people because they're not on the internet, which is, it is what it is, which is cool, great. I'm glad. I'm happy for them. But I'm also like, I have to accept that there's probably, those files will probably be there until they're not. But if there's any way that I can reduce the amount of files of of clarity conversations, I'll do so. And that's what I did last week, 2 weeks ago, with somebody where it's been over 10 years since we've talked. But because of how my brain works, it was in the filing cabinet. And I'm at a stage of my life where I've matured enough to be willing to seek clarity and to be open, willing, and also non-attached, like detached from the results of that conversation. And so I'm saying that because, yes, at a macro level, shades of gray, nuance, important, especially when it comes to a transition in society. But I've accepted the fact that at a micro level, that clarity is important to me, and that if I'm mature at a stage and understanding of the situation where I'm mature enough to ask for that clarity and to be willing to seek to understand what's happening, as opposed to like being in my personality and my ego and all of that, then I think for me it's worth naming. It's worth naming that clarity is important to me, so I know how to move. So for instance, last night, the situation that was happening yesterday with our mutual friend, and editing specifically. And my partner last night asked me when we were getting ice cream, they're like, I keep hearing you like talk about editing, like you're not, like there's like something there. I don't know what it is, but there's something there and you keep talking about it. And I told them that I'm just at a point in my life where I've accepted the fact that just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Just because I can be everything to everyone doesn't mean that I should. And that's what I was trying to tell them. There's prior to this chapter, I was trying to people please and to be everything to everyone. That's also the reason why it's prevented me from showing up online. And I'm at the point of being very clear about who I am in this season, because I've taken the time to gain clarity with myself. To be like, what is it? And what is it, and who do I need to be to have the experiences I want to experience? And so that's why when I'm saying, like, I'm not going to take on editing this season. It's a bottleneck and I don't want to do it. And so I'm going to call in someone who's willing to do the editing, and because they freaking love it and that's their zone of genius and they are more than happy to do it. That's great. But I'm going to press record 3 times on 3 different devices, and this is just what it's going to be. You know, I'm not going to sit here and edit for someone's attention span. And so it is what it is, what it is. So let me take a deep breath. But yeah, you know that situation. And so this is just where I'm at in this season. And I have clarity about how I want to share my energy, how I want to share my talents, my skills, and my abilities. And just realizing, just because I can do that, just because I can shapeshift, just because I can sit in confusion, just because I can do editing, doesn't mean that I should. And let alone doesn't mean that I want to. And if anything, I'd rather be clear about that now, about what I'm willing to do and what I'm not, so that, again, I know how to move in any opportunity or connection that comes my way. Let's continue. So you were talking about, I'm like, okay, now this is like maybe a whole different conversation. Probably is a whole different conversation. And now I'm thinking like, oh, we should just make this part another video. Because life. Because I can. Because I can. All right. We'll pause it here for YouTube Live. I think we'll also pause it on socials too. And then we will send this message to Janice. Well, okay. Let me see, like, this is what happens when you're like, meh. Okay, we're gonna press pause on this side. Ooh.